you do. In a moment, Craig Hulet joins us. We're going to talk about the carnage in the Great Britain area and also what else is going on this planet next on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast. George Norrie with you. Last week, I was talking with our executive producer, Lisa Lyon, and I said, Lisa, I just have a feeling this week things are going to be happening. We need to get Craig Hulet back on. And strangely enough, I had about 70 emails from people saying, when are you going to have Craig Hulet back on? So we are. Craig, of course, has been a speechwriter, special assistant for special projects to Congressman then Jack Metcalf. He's been a consultant to federal law enforcement, DEA, and a number of agencies for a number of years as well. His book is called The Hydra of Carnage, and I welcome back on this very ominous night, Craig Hulet. Craig, when does it stop, my friend?
Well, it's going to accelerate. It's not going to stop.
You know, this situation here, they're still trying to decide if it was a suicide bomber, if it was a lone wolf, or if it was part of ISIS or Al-Qaeda or who knows what. But what a cowardly act to go into a concert area on the outside of it and kill off primarily young kids.
Well, that's actually the classical act of terrorism and the purpose of terrorism, as opposed to an insurrection, civil war, or what I called in my book, I outlined what I felt was the difference after 9/11, an international guerrilla warfare movement of that kind. And it's because they hit a target, the World Trade Center, that had nothing but government and corporate ideology behind it. It was not an act of terrorism the way they did it and described it. What just happened in Great Britain, that is terrorism. You try to do something to hurt the people that live in a country, and so they'll feel the same pain that you feel has happened to people in your country. That's the act of terrorism. But 9/11 was something completely different. It wasn't an act of terrorism. It was the beginning of a guerrilla war that's going to last into several lifetimes. I don't think it'll ever be gone unless something really drastic happens in America, Russia, China, all come to an agreement about how to run the world. And I don't see that happening in the near future.
Craig, in this particular case in Manchester, in England, it appears that the bombing, the explosion occurred in the rotunda area, the lobby area of the theater. So it wasn't in the theater proper, but it was back a little bit as people were leaving. Does that sound like the perpetrator, the bomber, may have just come in from the outside figuring, they're not going to stop me. The concert's over?
Probably. Again, terrorism is something completely different than a lot of what we're facing throughout the world. And I don't think the American people are ready to make that distinction. I know the government isn't interested in defining the distinction because a counter-reaction to what we're doing in countries like in Syria, in Iraq, Afghanistan, and what we've been doing long before 9/11, those kinds of things were outlined by specialists in their field as blowback, and blowback against what's going on in someone's country is the same thing if you turn it around in your own head. If somebody comes into this country, say the Russians, they kill my family, I'm going to kill me some Russians.
Yeah.
That's not terrorism. That's an act against what they perceive to be grievances that are not ever going to be addressed. And, I think we're on the brink of something far worse than acts of terrorism. I think we're going to see another 9/11 in our future. I don't know what the relationship between Russia and China and America is going to turn out to be. I can tell you, as a paid analyst, I get paid to do the research. I get paid to do the analysis. I don't use subjective reasoning. I don't have opinions about things. I don't have the luxury to have an opinion. I have to be right.
And let's find out how right, Craig, when we come back in just a moment on Coast to Coast AM. Now, the guy from Pittsburgh just emailed me. Longtime actress Dinah Merrill is dead, 93 years old. You may not know the name, some of you younger folks, but if you Google her and see her picture, she's been in a lot of movies indeed. Her mother was part of the post-serial dynasty, and her father was E.F. Hutton. Great group of people, but she's dead at the age of 93. We will take your calls next hour with Craig Hulet as we talk about world events. And Craig, you were saying you are hired to find out and get these answers to people. What are you seeing these days? I mean, when you said that you think it's going to get worse, how worse? How bad?
Well, right now SOCOM has more troops in Africa than anywhere else in the world, except specific combat areas in the Middle East. And this has gone unnoticed for 5 years in North Africa. At the same time, China has now been referred to as a new colonial power because of what they're doing in Africa. 5 years prior to us ever creating SOCOM, the Chinese were there. They're there building bridges, hospitals, everything you can think of. They're in there building with the people of those nation states. We're not doing anything like that. We're there as a military power, and it's a pretty fearsome military right now. And we are directly involved with almost every single country's leadership in coercing them, bribing them, ordering them to allow our military to chase down so-called terrorists in each one of those countries. We're acting the way Great Britain used to act when Great Britain was a colonial power. And yet at the same time, we're saying that about China. And simultaneously, during the election run-up, Hillary Clinton and the Democrats all of a sudden started talking about Russia in a way that Democrats and liberals have never talked about Russia. And those are the kinds of things that, people don't call those facts or that's not information that you can readily use. Well, if you've done this for 40 years, yes, you can.
And that'll push you to the brink of war.
Well, the idea is something akin to this. I've tried to explain what research and analysis actually is to people that think they understand. And right now, almost everybody that's got an internet site and a web page, they can call themselves investigative reporters, researchers, analysts, and they're just guys in the bedroom playing drums and not getting paid. So the point here is that you can tell when things are happening and going in a certain direction as an analyst, the same way an investigator in law enforcement, when he does an interview with somebody who's a criminal, certain criminal acts carry the same traits. Certain geopolitical acts carry the same traits. It's like the flu. Why a doctor knows you've got the flu is he diagnoses you and he sees these certain things happening, symptoms, and he says you've got the flu. Well, a good analyst has done a lot of research, paid research, and his income is on the line. If you're wrong all the time, they're going to stop paying you. I've been doing this 35 years, and I'm still getting paid. And I'm telling you, we're so close to a conventional World War II right now that I don't even know what to tell your audience. I tell my clients something completely different than what I would probably never repeat on this interview. But if you look at what China's been doing, they are building up a machine in Africa that will be almost impossible to merge with or oppose without military force.
No, you're right. You're right. And they're doing it methodically and very, very smartly.
And Pakistan just gave them a lease on an open port in the Persian Gulf for 40 years.
Don't they have a lease down there, too, on the Panama now?
Yes. And these things are not to be taken lightly. And China has also built up the most fearsome naval force the world has ever seen. And why it doesn't get discussed here in America, in the American press, I think I do know why. Because they don't want the American people to become too aware of how American foreign policy has created the problems with China, Africa now, the Middle East. You know, we talk about we're going to go in and we're going to get rid of ISIS, and a half a dozen new names pop up as terrorists in North Africa, in the Middle East. Every week they have a new name for another group. But that's not what it is. That's not what is going on. We shouldn't even be in the Middle East. I don't know why it's so easy for Americans to say, there's bad people out there, and we've got to go after them, we've got to kill them. Well, if we hadn't been in the Middle East for 30 years, deciding who gets to be the leader of each country, and if we don't like him, we overthrow that regime. The CIA funds all the different groups to fight against each other, and then we decide who stays and who lives based on whether or not they'll cooperate with our efforts under corporatism, the exploitation of the natural resources, oil, pipeline, silver, gold mines. So these countries are going to react. The people are going to react. That blowback is going to continue.
Is that like what has happened today in Manchester, England?
No. I think that could have been, very simply, terrorism. Yeah, because of acts the British, the American, or the French government has done in a particular country, and that's terrorism. You go in and you hurt the people that have hurt your people by a direct assault on them. And you say, now how does that feel? You try to hurt them. It's a lashing out.
Right.
Blowback isn't the same thing. Blowback is changing how you will be allowed to function in that country. Now, if you won't leave that country and your actions continue to kill thousands of women and children, not just men, women and children, it'll motivate them even greater. I wrote a chapter of international guerrilla warfare in the book, The Hydra, and the few people that have written me, that's probably the most significant chapter I've ever written on anything, because that's what's pulling these groups together. I don't know if you recall, but 40 years ago, during the 60s and 70s, terrorist groups worked together. The Red Army worked with Che Guevara. Castro's people dealt with the Red Brigade.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was working together. That was the beginning of a different kind of warfare that we, in America, didn't have an understanding of yet. We looked at it like criminal organizations, and that's why it was so difficult to get rid of them. Well, now we are in the middle of the largest international guerrilla war directed directly at the United States, and we're not going to be safe wherever we are.
And situations that happen today are very difficult to stop.
Well, they're impossible to stop. You can't. You cannot have a war against terrorism. You'll lose.
And again, I don't think
the head of counterterrorism at the CIA wrote a book, and he said point blank, if you want to have a war against terrorism, you will lose. You have to change what's causing their discomfort,
right,
their grievance.
Is it conceivable that even if everything was peaceful, there'd be a group out there to try to disrupt things, just to disrupt things?
Oh, you mean like vandals on the internet?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. But not something that we have to devote 1/3 of our entire budget to the militarization of every aspect of our life globally. We talk about what just happened with Saudi Arabia, and that Trump's having a fairly good time over there with Saudi Arabia. It might be because we just gave them $350 billion over the next decade, the single largest paycheck since 1.5 years ago. Obama gave them $130 billion. And also Israel got $130 billion. So I'm predicting, and I don't like predictions, but I'm predicting Israel's going to get an equal sum of money that the Saudis just got.
Probably.
And this is supposed to make things better for who? Who is it making it better for? Americans don't live in Saudi Arabia. We know why we're in Saudi Arabia. We also know how much evidence has been gathered over the last 5 years, proving in a court of law that the Saudis were behind 9/11, and that was, in fact, an act of war. So all I can say is this, and I've said it on your show, I say it everywhere I go. If it comes up, I will say this. As long as this continues, I can tell you point blank, the continuity of government theory of operations is in place. When people show up at the White House like Henry Kissinger, Dick Cheney, when people all of a sudden come out of nowhere and start writing articles like Paul Wolfowitz, now you know what's going on.
No, you're right.
I don't care who's in the White House. There's going to be no change in direction of the corporate global regime moving forward, and that's just going to pan out. That's not even, I wouldn't even want to call it a prediction. That's being insulting. It should be obvious to everybody that this is about oil, pipelines, sometimes gold and silver. But the other countries of the world aren't afraid of us. Russia just made a deal for Siberian gold mining. They've never been able to mine for gold. The Chinese have the technology now. They've gotten together with BRICS, and they're going to create the largest gold mine in the history of the world, which explains why a year ago Putin and China said no more petrodollars. We pay for everything in a new money backed by gold. And BRICS is going to issue a world currency backed by gold. Now, if you've never read international relations, if you know nothing about foreign affairs, you wouldn't understand what I'm about to say. That's the equivalent of an act of war in any other period of history.
I've got to ask you if you have been following the story of the dead 27-year-old Democratic staffer Seth Rich, who was murdered in D.C. Back a year ago, where they claim it was a robbery, but nothing was taken from the guy.
Right.
So,
no, we've had too many of those. We've had far too many people connected politically have died. Journalists, staffers, everybody you can think. It doesn't matter whether you know each and every one of them. Somebody's out there already collecting the list, especially when the Clintons were in the White House. For some reason, there seemed to be more of them. But that's just a symptom of the corruption within our own domestic population. Nobody's going to stop this machinery. No. And nobody's going to go public and talk about this machinery and get heard. Do you know what the Smith-Mundt Act was?
Doesn't that have to do with drones or something?
No, the Smith-Mundt Act, M-U-N-D-T, was passed right after the end of World War II. We looked at Germany, their propaganda, Japan, the way they used propaganda, and we passed the law, the Smith-Mundt Act, to never use propaganda against our own citizenry. That was the equivalent of admitting we're like the Nazis and even worse. Because there'd be no real reason for it. America stood on the side of justice and liberty at the time. Well, the Smith-Mundt Act was overthrown in 2014. It was signed off by Obama. This doesn't indict Obama especially, but it's no longer the law of the land. Since that was signed off in a Defense Authorization Act, the United States government is propagandizing in its own self-interest, in the corporate interest, the global militarization interest, telling the American people lies.
Maybe we'll have a ministry of propaganda, right?
I believe we already do.
I think you're right.
The problem is that the American people don't know what's true and what's not anymore because the American people don't read nonfiction books any longer.
So that's so true. Now, what's this about the Army testing a microwave weapon system somewhere?
Well, that's the other thing this office follows. You know, there's no point in looking at the economy and giving your company or your people or an industry advice on what they ought to do and not tell them at the same time the military in America is building some of the most incredible, the one you're talking about right now is a microwave weapon they're developing in New Mexico right now. There's a laser weapon that's actually going to be deployed this year on the same level. And these weapons literally are Star Wars weapons. And you have to understand, if we were at war, if America was at war, and clearly we are in some context because 22,000 combat veterans have committed suicide.
I know.
2 every day.
It's astounding.
Commit suicide, and yet the VA funds haven't been restored. They're not getting treatment. In fact, there's whistleblowers now out complaining that the facilities they are building are shoddy and more dangerous than ever for veterans. I know veterans that aren't getting treatment for anything. So we are at war. Our veterans are the proof of it. But in whose interest? Why don't we ask as citizens, in whose interest are these weapons being deployed? Remember I did your show about the microwave weapons training ranges that were being secretly deployed on beach coastal towns,
Yep.
including right here where I live.
It was crazy. I thought.
It turns out that I was correct at the time when I argued on your show, the very first show I did on it, that there were 29 other states that are doing exactly the same thing. The Navy is in those states as well, all the coastal states.
Is this to turn on us?
And then it turns out it's not just 80 Grumman F-35s. It's not just a handful of them doing training. They're developing that fighter plane, that technology. They want 100,000 of them within 5 years to deploy all over the world. They're training here, and of course, here we're told they're training here for our protection in case we're attacked. And yet there's no hint in the world that America should be under attack by any nation state, unless you recognize 9/11 as an act of war by the Saudis in behest of who? The Saudis did 9/11. It's almost unquestionable at this point. But why would they do that? Would Saudi Arabia do that in its own interest?
What would they gain by that?
They wouldn't gain anything.
No.
In fact, being friends with America, they gain nothing but more money, as the Trump administration.
But what they do
the largest check in history
is they buy off the terrorists to leave them alone.
Terrorism. The Saudis have never not funded terrorism.
That's right.
They are the largest single funder of every terrorist organization in the entire world.
That's why nothing ever happens there. And I got to believe the same thing happens in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, because nothing happens there either.
Okay, then ask yourself a question. If 9/11 was then, and I'm sorry, I'm doing an analyst's work here. You don't just get to throw facts out.
And we don't have to pay you for it.
Okay? That's doing what Noam Chomsky called factoids. You're not doing anything. You're not helping anybody. Who would they be doing this for? Well, I got a hint. I got a little idea in the back of my head when I'm doing all this other research, and I'm seeing China and Russia building up their military on a scale that's unheard of. China's military is now so large, it's conceivable that nobody could defeat them if they wanted to take over the entire Pacific region.
And they are so technologically advanced from what they were 20 years ago. It's dramatic.
Again, they remain a communist state. They remain a communist state. Russia's not a communist state. But now we're talking about Russia as though it is a communist state, and all you got to do is just do some quick math here, okay?
Hold on for a second, Craig. Already at the top of the hour, we'll come back, talk more, take phone calls with you next on Coast to Coast AM. Craig Hulet with us talking about world events. We'll take your phone calls with him this hour as well on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back. Craig Hulet with us. We'll get to your calls as well this hour, Craig, as we talk about what's going on worldwide. It's China revs up. Russia keeps revving up. You know, Saddam Hussein wanted to do away with the petrodollar, and I think that's one of the reasons we did him in. Russia and China would love to do that, would they not?
They've already done it. They already do not buy, using the U.S. dollar, anything to do with oil. They use their own currency.
Or gold, right?
Or gold. And if they have a gold-backed currency at BRICS, or Russia issues it gold-backed currency in Russian dollars, whether it stays the ruble or whatever the name they put on it, you know, I don't know if your listeners are getting my point. When you attack, when you do something like that, when you disrupt the financial system of the globe by taking a giant move away from something that's been in practice for 100 years, that's considered an act of war, no differently than if you mine the New York harbor with Russian ships. There are certain things that are just not done. And when they are done, any good analyst is going to report to his clients, that's what's taking place. Okay, China needing that port, go look at a map. In fact, please, go look at a map and look at the port in Pakistan, the port of Hormuz, the waterways, the Persian Gulf, the countries that are adjacent to that port that just granted China a 40-year lease.
Jeez.
Nobody thinks it's going to be used for anything except two things: a launch of military might in the region that China is lacking. And second, they've been building a pipeline that's supposed to run a terminal of 1 million barrels per day pipeline across Pakistan into Western China. Now, these are actions of countries that are not at war yet, but these are also interpreted properly as actions of a country thinking they might be at war.
And to be ready for it.
And be ready for it. And Russia's doing the same thing. All Putin does every single day, I got a Putin watch on this guy. Every day he shows up in another foreign country offering money, military hardware, anything they need, making deals with them.
And they're making deals with them.
And for good reason. We're not.
We're not.
We're not trying to help Venezuela, Mexico. We don't even want to help Australia. America doesn't help any of the countries in Africa under AFRICOM. All we do is train each one of those little countries, like Rwanda. We train their military, and they turn over the authority to use that military to AFRICOM.
I mean, why aren't we helping Venezuela? They're in disarray. The people there are starving. Hugo Chavez is dead.
Well, see what you just did? You did it, George. And that's why I love you.
What did I do?
You said we.
Yeah.
How do you think America or the American people or American interests are even involved?
They're not, unfortunately.
There's no we anymore in the United States of America. If you still believe America is the America of the Founding Fathers and that that's what's going on in the world, then when Paul Wolfowitz leaves his back cave in Transylvania and goes public and starts praising Donald Trump for doing something in Syria, this office is all our antennas go up. Why would Wolfowitz come out of nowhere and suddenly start supporting Trump? Well, he doesn't. He doesn't support anybody. He supports the continuity of the governing corporate regime that's trying to rule the world through military might, to gain financially the raw materials and access to everything from waterways to arable land to the water in Africa, actually the water in Africa. That's what our American government is doing. We're being used by the corporate world to achieve those objectives. So when Donald Trump goes to Saudi Arabia and Israel, my God, do you actually think he's doing something there to benefit those people and us, our people? Nothing of the sort is going on. Nothing like that's going on. When you see Kissinger, Cheney, Wolfowitz, when you see that crew lining up and suggesting policy formulation for the White House, all I can tell you is, and I said it before Trump got elected, I said it if Hillary got elected, I said it when Obama got elected, on the issues that matter, nothing's going to change.
You're so right. You ready for some calls?
Absolutely.
Let's go to Gail in Missouri. Welcome to the program, Gail, and you are up. Go ahead, Gail.
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Wilkins, I believe, sir, if I heard you on previous programs, you had predicted that Hillary Clinton was going to be elected.
No, I didn't.
She wasn't.
I never said that. That's the other
My
thing that's wrong
mistake,
here
then.
in this country. I said the elite had it planned 10 years ago to run Hillary Clinton against Jeb Bush. Then they would haul out all the dirt they had on Hillary, and Jeb Bush was a shoo-in. It was a plan of the elite. I don't even care who wins the election at the level of the president, because the presidency doesn't matter anymore. The presidency doesn't matter under empire.
Go ahead, Gail.
How can you believe the president has the power to change the direction of the largest global corporations that are larger than most nation states?
That's why they say one thing, and then they do the other when they get elected.
Absolutely. And it isn't always that they're bad people. I'm not going to sit here and listen to people yelling at Donald Trump saying he's a bad man because he said one thing during the campaign and he's doing another. I'm sorry. Every president has done that since JFK died.
All right, Gail, go ahead. What was your point, hon?
Do you have, well, I was going to ask if he thought Trump would finish out his term. But, Mr. Wilkins, do you have any hope at all for this country?
Do I have any hope for this country? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I think that's what she's asking.
She's asking if I have it. Hope is not a plan of action. Hope is not something that I can use to talk to my client base, whether they're individuals, lawyers, businessmen, or people in law enforcement or the military. I can't offer anything to them like that because it's faith-based. If you want to have hope, have hope. I think the Jews had a lot of hope that somebody was going to come and save them, and for 4 years that hope was not exactly followed through on. Hope has a place in people's lives, but not geopolitical affairs, foreign affairs, and empire. If we don't start admitting that America is no longer America, America is being used by a corporate empire that does not hold any interest in what happens to Americans domestically. They don't care.
And I would assume it's every country doing the same thing. They're all in it for themselves now, aren't they?
Well, it's in some countries, I guess, they're a little more directed, like Sweden has more interest in the domestic population, so, there's, rehab and alcohol, 12 steps, and,
right.
You get clean needles when I don't know. I don't know what's going on in other states. I don't think we should be looking at other states to compare America to. I think we should be looking at what America and the dream was supposed to be and why it is not here. Why do we have 98 million Americans permanently unemployed, will never work again, and they don't go looking for a job?
They've given up.
They've given up. Okay, so let's bring manufacturing back home, Donald. Let's bring manufacturing back home. Who's going to apply for the jobs?
You're going to have to get people from other countries to come in and do it.
Precisely, and which is what they're doing and why we want to build a wall.
We go to Mike in West Palm Beach, Florida now. Michael, take it away.
Okay, I want to give some evidence that our president is under complete control of the Russian mafia. You laugh. Let me give you the details.
All right, give us details.
Okay.
What do you got?
7 or 8 years ago, Mr. Trump then bought a piece of real estate in Palm Beach for $40 million, a house.
Okay.
He couldn't sell it for 2 years. Nobody wanted it. Along comes one of those corrupt Russian billionaires and gives him $95 million for it. The Russian billionaire demolishes the house, carves it up into a few pieces of land, and can't sell it. It's a whole problem with it. I think at that point he took a bribe. $40 million to $95 million is $55 million bribe from the Russian mafia. Once he took that money, he took it with strings.
No, he didn't.
I think it all stems from that real estate deal.
No, I'm sorry. I don't like
Craig.
Donald Trump at all, but I don't like him for the right reasons.
That's a pretty good bump return, though, huh? You buy it for 40 and sell it for 95?
Oh, look, organized crime in Russia, they've had their fingers in almost every corporation and businessman's hands. I do business with Russians.
They're smart business people.
Sometimes they're the only ones that will do certain things. And I'm not talking just the mobsters. They're no longer a communist regime.
I've got a friend in St. Louis. He runs a construction company. He's Russian. The guy is doing so well. He bought a 40-acre farm. He's got a huge house. He's got another house. And this is a guy who just came over from Russia and started doing what he's doing. I mean, they are smart people, Craig.
Okay, let me put something to your audience. It won't take me a minute.
All right.
Put this in your hat. Why all of a sudden, with a new president, and it would have happened if Hillary won, it would have happened if Jeb Bush had won, which was the plan, until Karl Rove screwed up. Okay, now we got Trump, and now everybody's going to focus that Trump's either the bad guy or the good guy. That he's the savior of America or he's the evil savior.
Right, he's one or the other.
One of those things.
Yeah.
He's neither that nor any. In fact, he wouldn't even know how to do either one of those things. But what he is the imperial presidency of our system is there to distract the American people and the world about the issues that matter. Get off the issues that matter. So the continuity of government doesn't change. That's why it won't change. That's why when Wolfowitz left his bat cave in Transylvania and came public, all I could do is yell at people to go to my website, go all the way to the bottom, and look at the Seymour Hersh article about who Wolfowitz is.
Is Jeb Bush finished, or is he coming back one day?
Jeb Bush will always come back.
He'll come back.
Hell yes.
Yeah.
Which is silly, but they are an imperial family.
He could get the nomination again.
How much do you think George Bush Sr. and Zapata Oil did business with Russia?
I bet they did a lot, didn't they?
Yeah.
Nobody says anything about that.
No, the reason we're doing this Russia thing right now, and we're throwing the mud on Trump, the Russian bad guys and stuff, is for the original reason, going back 8 years, when Vladimir Putin, and I predicted, and I never make predictions, but this one was easy. We go into the Middle East to take over the Middle East because the Berlin Wall fell, the Soviet Union fell, and Russia was left, and there's Putin, and we took over the entire Middle East, and I said, once you get within 100 miles of the Russian border,
look out.
The Russians will stand up and say that's far enough.
Yep.
And that's precisely
look out.
why all the Russia bashing coming out of Democrats and Republicans, because they're owned by the same corporations. Archer Daniels Midland funds the Democrats and the Republicans. Isn't
it better, though, to have a relationship with Russia than tension about a nuclear war with them?
No, not in the mind of these men.
They'd rather have the war, wouldn't they?
Dick Cheney is a scary man. So is Wolfowitz. I've meant what I said. Go to my website, look down at the bottom of the front page, read that article from Seymour Hersh. It was gangbusters and identified Wolfowitz as probably one of the most dangerous men you could ever put on a leash at the White House level. And guess what he got after he corrupted the Iraq War, corrupted the Pentagon, corrupted the intelligence, forced everybody to lie about Iraq and weapons of mass destruction. He set up his own intelligence service in the Pentagon. 100 CIA and Defense Intelligence officers quit in protest and held a protest against him personally on the steps of the White House. Did we put him in jail? Did he get punished? Is his name smeared? No. They said, Wolfowitz, you can't be here anymore working for George Bush Jr., so go be the president of the World Bank.
And he's doing pretty well doing that, isn't he?
Yeah, this is the first time he's come out since then, because he's not president of the World Bank anymore.
We go to Joe in Long Island. Hey, Joe, welcome to the show. Go ahead.
Yeah, Craig, the Chinese are buying up a lot of farms in the Mideast, Smithfield as an example, and politicians are acquiescing to that locally. And the other thing is...
Okay, I would ask you to repeat that so that make sure everybody heard and understood exactly what you just said.
And the local politicians are acquiescing.
If you look at what China has done in Victoria, the city of Victoria in British Columbia, that's what will happen if China gets to trade wealth for visas and come to America.
And they're buying up Vancouver, Canada, aren't they?
Yeah, that's what I just said. Oh, did I say Victoria?
You said Victoria.
Canada. Yeah. In fact, if you go there, people are literally in tears. They buy up hundreds of the best homes, pay twice as much for them, and then nobody moves into the house.
I know it. It's amazing. What else, Joe? Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask about almost like a conspiracy against the fitness crowd. There's no place to walk, there's no place to ride a bike, there's no place to jog, the air is bad, and also loose weaponry.
What do you mean by that, loose weaponry?
Loose weaponry meaning, there's not a lock and key on all these weapons. Like, for example, we left behind weapons in Iraq that were just picked up by anybody.
Well, we know ISIS picked up a lot. Go ahead, Craig.
Right there. Okay, stop right there. Okay, see, this is why I love your audience, okay? This guy actually thinks about some things. Every time,
he's sharp.
5 years under Obama, the last 5 years he was there, I was forced to report on stories that were saying ISIS somehow secretly snuck in, and the Iraqi army got scared, and they all ran away, and then left behind thousands of rounds, howitzer shells, Humvees, billions of rounds.
Uniforms, everything.
And ISIS just scooped it all up like they stole it from the scaredy cats. Excuse me, the United States Pentagon was in charge of the retreat. Anybody that retreats and leaves weapons intact would be shot in any other war. It's the first rule of warfare. That's why the poison wells raised the land. Remember, Hitler trying to, Waterloo, Napoleon. You don't leave weapons behind to arm. Whoa. Well, unless you wanted to.
There you go. Unless you wanted to. And that's the whole key to the whole thing. So we did help make them, didn't we?
Oh, yeah, we did help create ISIS. In fact, anybody that says that that's not true now in the area of foreign affairs and international relations, they start getting laughed at. Of course we created ISIS, and of course we're funding Al-Qaeda in Syria to fight Assad of Syria. But this has got nothing about Assad or chemical weapons. How can anybody believe at the height of Syria winning, backed by Putin, and they're killing ISIS and Al-Qaeda and his opposition, suddenly when he's on the path to total victory, he would gas his own people?
I don't think so.
No. It's because the powers that be wanted Syria, Iraq, Libya, and I say the powers that be, the U.S. and Western multinational corporations that have formed a global regime of economic interdependence.
We're going to come back in a moment with Craig Hulet and take final phone calls, fast hour and a half with him. His book is called The Hydra of Carnage. His website linked up at coasttocoastam.com. It's Craig B. You got to put that in there. Hulet, HULET.com. And again, it's linked up for you at coasttocoastam.com. Well, welcome back to Coast to Coast. We're going to come back in just a moment with final phone calls with Craig Hulet as we talk about these worldwide events. Welcome back. George Norrie with you. At least 22 dead now, 59 wounded in that Manchester, England arena bombing situation. Police believe that the suicide bomber was involved and obviously is dead with that too. Jeez, Craig. Now, Craig, do they drug these guys up before they go ahead and do what they're going to do?
That there is a little bit of that. There even was that in the Vietnam War, the Korean War. Even in World War II, there was some of that going on. But I doubt that individual. It sounds like it was personal, and it was what is recalled customary terrorism. There's a number of books out besides my book that tries to explain, for you to understand as civilians, that terrorism is a reaction of people who felt they've been terrorized by your country.
And victimized. That's right.
Killed their mother, their children, their daughter, their son, not military personnel. And they're just acting out the same way you would if someone from a foreign country, Chinese, killed your mother, sister, brother, Uncle Fred.
Well, I don't think I'd go blow up innocent people, Craig.
But the thing that we're dealing with in the Middle East is not that. It is not terrorism at all. It's international guerrilla warfare, and it's why they're working together with different groups all across all three continents. And in fact, I think it's going to get far worse because we're not addressing that as what it is. If we wanted to address international guerrilla warfare the way I've just described it, we would have to change our foreign policy to address the citizens' grievances in the countries where we're dominating them politically and militarily.
Sure. Now, wouldn't ISIS have already claimed credit for this situation?
Oh, hell yes, if they did it.
If they
Absolutely.
did it, yeah.
And that's why 9/11 was not bin Laden. He never claimed credit. In fact, he did go public and say, I didn't do that. But I think they did a great job. No, the Saudis did 9/11. It was an act of war, and I don't know whether Bush knew or not, and I don't really care. What really bothers me
I don't think
that
he
we
knew.
no longer have a free press that'll tell the American people the truth.
Or at least point out things to give them the chance to think about things.
I think America deserved, here domestically, we deserved better than we've gotten because of 9/11.
Well, didn't we?
It was a bloody act of war, and they chose the World Trade Organization because that symbolizes the corporate global regime that foreign people in foreign lands understand perfectly. I don't ever have a problem explaining the global regime of economic interdependence, that's the correct language, of the corporations, Western corporations that are monopolies, and 51 of those corporations are larger than all nation states except America. These giant corporations use the Pentagon to kill people in countries where they want the oil, put in a pipeline, and the big one coming up. This is going to be really incredible. I probably won't be alive, but you probably will. You're more relaxed than me. So you'll probably be around because they're going to be water wars.
No, you're absolutely right.
Huge. They're going to make oil wars and pipeline wars look like a joke.
I've got to be in Boulder, Colorado in a few weeks. That's where we tape our television programs. And they had 3 feet of snow last week.
Don't get me started.
Unbelievable.
I live in a rainforest that's had a drought for 10 years, and we just got 7 straight months of constant downpour.
I know
I thought I was in Vietnam.
I know it.
Burma again.
There's no water shortage there now, is there? Let's go back to the phones. Blair in Sedona, welcome to the program. Hi, Blair. Go ahead.
Thank you, George. Mr. Hulet, our tax dollars are being used against us. My goodness, forgetting our own country first, infrastructure, schools, besides the other nation states you've talked about. So we've got to start first with here and wake up. I mean, come on. In the service of money rather than fellow man, what is more profitable in the short term but war? And Ike was a prophet when he left office now. Economic hitmen to the next level, totally ignoring the destruction of the Earth's biosphere. And you said there's 51 corporations. Can you give some names of where most of this money, the lion's share of money, is going to?
Okay, first of all, I'll make it correct. I say it correctly. I wrote an article for Foreign Affairs, the Journal of Foreign Affairs published an anthology that I produced. My article was Foreign Affairs Affects Domestic Relations. And one of the first things I identified is that of the 100 largest economies in the world, America's economy being the biggest, 51 are now multinational monopoly corporations. Second, of all the international trade, and this is still true today, there's no difference now, except it's gotten worse. In international trade, when they keep talking about trade with other nations, it's a lie. They're not telling you the truth, and it needs to be understood. The trade they're talking about is between Ford Motor Company in Detroit and Ford Motor Company in Bonn, Germany. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
It's intra-corporate trade. 48% of it is intra-corporate trade. Stop. So you're going to try to tax the largest corporations if they don't keep jobs here at home?
Nope.
Really? You think you could do that to these corporations? And Trump just doesn't understand the mechanics of it. That's why it won't happen. I don't know if he's sincere that he would try to tax companies selling stuff in Mexico, but does he understand that the companies selling stuff in Mexico are American corporations that control the maquiladoras? It's Ford and General Electric building stuff in Mexico and then shipping it to America. He's going to tax them? Do you see how silly this is getting?
And
he smoke and mirrors.
He has changed a lot of the things he talked about in the campaign. He hated NAFTA. Now he wants to work out a better NAFTA deal. He hated NATO. Now that's okay. How can he say these things off the cuff in a campaign, and then once he gets in office, he realizes, I can't. I even think deep down inside, Craig, he thinks Obamacare may not be as bad as it was, but he wants to try to fix it a little bit.
He wants to get the name off of it.
Yeah.
He doesn't want Obamacare. He wants Trump care.
Yeah.
So I think I understand Donald Trump well enough from having been a corporate businessman myself, and some of my clients with large corporations like Exxon and Weyerhaeuser. And I think I do understand. The difference is he's devoted no time to foreign relations or international relations study. He doesn't understand any of these things. So he feels a certain way until somebody like Dick Cheney, and he doesn't listen to his handlers. Okay, he doesn't have any respect for the low-level handlers and staffers and advisors. Okay, but when Dick Cheney speaks, he listens.
Or Kissinger.
When Wolfowitz speaks, he listens.
Yeah.
And they told him what I just said. You can't tax corporations in Mexico sending products across into America. You got slapped 20% tax. Over half of them are the American corporations that built the maquiladoras in Mexico.
That's right.
And Donald went, oh, I didn't know that.
Keith in Berkeley, Illinois. Welcome to the program, Keith. You're on the air with us.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Norrie.
Hi there.
Do you know Rick Wiles?
Yes.
You should call him and get his prophet on there. I'm an evangelical.
Okay.
And everything that Mark Taylor has said has come true. From 2000, he predicted Donald Trump would win the election in 2011.
Yes, he did.
I don't know if you've heard his prophecies or not.
I've heard his prophecies. I don't know if he's got any recent ones, but I've heard of the old ones.
They're clear up to 316 now.
Wow.
Of this year.
That's pretty good. Anyways, go ahead, Keith. Was that it?
Well, I wanted to see if you could get him on the show. His predictions have come absolutely true all the way through.
Okay, we'll work on that. Thank you. Thomas in La Jolla, California. Hello there, Thomas.
Hello, George. Thank you for taking my call.
Very welcome.
Craig, it's honor and a pleasure, sir. And Craig, I wanted to ask you about two acts of war that were committed against United States naval vessels. You may be familiar with them. First was the USS Pueblo, which was captured in international waters by North Korea. The second vessel was USS Liberty, which was strafed and bombed and left dead in the water in the Mediterranean, and 34 sailors died. Yet it seemed that President Johnson and Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara stood down on both of those incidents, which were quite severe. Both of those naval vessels had satellite uplinks to the Pentagon and to the National Security Agency, and they both radioed that they were under attack, yet there was no response. And I was wondering if you would comment on either or both, and perhaps the president was told to stand down by the transnational corporate oligarchy. Anyway, that is my question.
Well, the USS Liberty, that was when the Israelis bombed it, claiming that they thought it was Egyptian or something like that. Wasn't it, Craig?
I'm afraid I would have to answer it loosely. Again, he's asking a question about why our government does certain things. Why do we decide to make war on one country for doing something, and yet when something else happens that's even worse, we do nothing? Well, that's pretty easily understood if you've read a lot of books about international wars that are fought by your country. And if you read a lot of them, one of them is Evan Luard's book on international war. It's a tomb, but he makes the argument first, and then he finally closes it and says, in every age, doesn't matter when, the ultimate sources of war are the beliefs of those in power, their idea about what it is of most fundamental importance, and may therefore ultimately be worth a war. Now, Noam Chomsky has lied for 40 years. He's lied to the American people for 40 years, saying that it's institutions that are corrupt, and you can't blame individuals for the acts they do while they're in office. It's the corrupt institutions. That's progressive leftist hokum. It's the beliefs of those in power and what they feel is worthy of a war. 9/11 was an act of war by Saudi Arabia. They knew they would get away with it with George Bush Jr. in the White House because they would blame Iraq and Afghanistan, the two countries that are the enemies of Saudi Arabia. The Saudis bet, and they were right, that we would attack their enemies for them. All they have to do is lower the price of oil, keep access open to the American corporations, and we will keep our special relationship, they call it. And every president has to bow to the Saudis and the Israelis in their first year in office, even Trump. I guarantee you, Trump is scratching his head now and then going, I thought I could be my own man. And I think he really did believe that. I think he did.
And he's probably fighting with himself to try to still be.
It's not going to happen. It'll never happen. They have you can't know the power this corporate regime has.
Do you think
you don't see any essence of it? You don't feel it here at home because it's a corporate power that's wielded internationally, and they don't care what happens here in America domestically. So you're not even aware of this corporate regime that thinks it can run the world. You don't even see the outcome. The people that see the outcome are the Syrians, the Afghanis, even the Israelis.
In about another year and a half or so, Craig, candidates are going to start lining up again. Democrats and any Republicans that may want to face off against Donald Trump. Do you think that he will not seek re-election?
Oh, no, he'll seek re-election.
You think he will?
If he serves 8 years total, he'll try to run for a third term, citing FDR as relevant.
No way.
Yes, he will. He's not of that nature, unless he's sick, or ill or something.
Well, he's
the same
up
Donald
there.
Trump he is today. No, after he's in 8 years, he'll stick for another 4. You try to impeach him, you'll have to shoot him.
Well, let's not go there.
But the truth of the matter is Donald Trump has no more power as the president than anybody else since Jack Kennedy. I don't know why everybody's lost sight of it because of Hillary and Trump running, except for the fact that a large boost was given to some Democrats that had quit voting, and they voted for Hillary because they hated Trump. And a lot of right-wingers and conservatives and Republicans, some people that have never registered to vote, decided to register and vote for Trump because they hated Hillary that much. But hate politics is not a reasonable reason for an election. Sooner or later, you're going to have to look at what these people, as president, the White House, allows to go on in the Congress and in the Pentagon worldwide that is not in your interest.
Are we going to get tax reform?
Hell no.
So that's going to be off the chart.
Well, the corporations might get another capital gains break. They'll get a break, sure.
I mean, the middle class. They're
No,
not going to get any.
hell no.
Not going to happen.
George, let me ask you something.
Go ahead.
Who pays for Social Security in this country?
The middle class.
No, who pays for it?
What do you mean we do?
No, who?
What do you mean who?
The workers that are working.
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. The working man works and woman.
Security.
Exactly.
So what's going to happen when the 98 million that are permanently unemployed and aren't even looking for a job goes to 150 million, and because of the demographics of America, we're getting older every year.
It's broke.
People are going to file for Social Security, and less people will be working, so they won't have a source to pay those people that are retired. What do you think you're going to do?
It'll be broke.
Well, the government never goes broke. The government can just print money.
They print more money.
But they also don't like the money going somewhere other than where they want it to go. Like they want $350 billion to go to Saudi Arabia, not $350 billion to guarantee Social Security and Medicare here in America. And don't sit there and say, well, that's Donald Trump's doing. Hillary would have done the same damn thing.
Well, a minute to go. Let's wrap up this situation in England. Sadly enough, do you think it was a lone wolf?
It sounds like more and more it is. Somebody that actually did an act of terrorism. But you know what? I'm going to do something. I haven't talked to you in a long time. I've only got about 300 copies of the Hydra left. If anybody wants a copy of it, I will cut the price in half, and if you buy it, you can have a free white paper, the most recent white paper I just produced. I'll email it to you.
Through your website?
CraigBHulet.com.
You got it. Craig, thanks for being on the program again.
It's a pleasure.
Appreciate it. He's outspoken, to say the least. He is outspoken indeed. There's some things we don't like to talk about on this program for obvious reasons. So he made up a little reference to something. So we apologize for that. We're going to come back in a moment and talk about witchcraft on Coast to Coast AM. Don't go away. On Coast to Coast AM. Don't go away.